Good afternoon. Welcome all of you to the Sustainable Procurement Webinar 2021. I'm Felix Lam of Green Council. Will be the moderator for this webinar. The theme of today's webinar is about plastic rethink to avoid burden shifting and greenwashing. As you know, in Hong Kong, the plastic bag, plastic cutlery, and the plastic beverage container in fact cover half of the waste plastic disposed at the landfill. The conventional impact to Hong Kong, you may understand the conventional impact to Hong Kong are significant. And this impact can be also global, yeah, because some of these plastic waste might even go to the ocean to pollute the ocean. What should we do or what can we do? Should we switch to bio-based plastic or should we use alternative material to plastic? Can we rely on some green label or in fact some responsible company like Swire Coca-Cola, they have started to avoid or reduce plastic. What can we learn from them? Today, we are very honored to have 4 experts who try to provide insight for us to rethink plastic to avoid burden shifting and greenwashing. During the presentation, if you have any question, please write down to the question box. We shall answer your question during the Q&A after their presentation. Okay, now start. Our first speaker is Mr. Stephen Choi. He is the head of certification of Green Council. He is responsible for the operation of the Hong Kong Green Label Scheme, which is the scheme in Hong Kong for the certification and recognition of the environmentally preferable product. Rely on the eco-label is always recommended in procurement. But what type of green label can you trust? Okay, then welcome, Stephen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen from the Green Council. Today, I'm going to give you a brief introduction on labels regarding plastic products and plastic recycling. Let me briefly introduce my organization first. The Green Council was established in 2000, which is an environmental organization and a credit certification body with non-profit making status. Consumers are increasingly aware of the impact of plastics on the environment. However, information provided on plastics is not always clear and actionable. The rising public awareness and concern about plastics has encouraged businesses to increasingly communicate this information about their packaging. However, this information is not always clear enough for consumers. Last year, the United Nations Environment Programme, Consumers International, the One Planet Network jointly carry out research studies on labels and claims on plastic packaging. And the report found out that only 17% of the 30 worldwide labels assessed gave consumers quality information to make informed purchasing and recycling decisions. Labels about compostability and biodegradability are the most challenging, as only a small percentage of users have access to the appropriate infrastructure. The report also found confusing use of the chasing arrow symbol associated with recycling, but not always used by manufacturers for this purpose. So, what is the definition of green? We all know that there's no absolute green in the society. All of us consume resources. From the United States Environmental Protection Agency, a green product refers to a product that has a smaller or reduced effect on human health and the environment when compared with competing products that serve the same purpose. But how do you prove that your product is environmentally preferable? Many products on the market today are guilty of so-called greenwashing. False or misleading claims regarding the benefits towards the environment are often very general or not related to the product itself. An eco-label can help us sometimes, especially those run by the government or multi-stakeholder support. They are more reliable. So what is the definition of an eco-label? An eco-label identifies a product that meets specified environmental performance criteria or standards, and awarded by a third-party organization to products that are determined to meet the specific criteria and standards. The first eco-label in the world, the German Blue Angel, was established in 1978. There are different types of eco-label in the world, and the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, established guiding principles for the development and use of environmental labels and declarations. There are 3 types of environmental labels. The Type 1 ISO 14024 label is a voluntary instead of regulatory label. Be open to all potential applicants. It is multiple criteria based, a third-party program that awards a license to authorize the use of that green label, which indicate overall environmental preferability of a product within a specific product category. Requirements and product categories of different Type 1 eco-labels can be different, reflecting regional variables, but all of their standards address multiple environmental and health issues, which include toxicity, air quality, energy and water use, recyclability, use of natural resources, etc., based on the life cycle considerations. Type 2 labels are self-declared environmental claims, and most of them are not verified independently. I will show you some of them later in my slide. Lastly, Type 3 are environmental declarations, which require reporting of calculatable life cycle data, such as energy data and carbon emissions data. It involves collection of a lot of production data, and it is quite common in industrial countries like Korea and Japan. Today, I will focus more on Type 1 eco-label. ISO Type 1 eco-label has one main characteristics, which is based on performance leadership. The certified product can only be passed or fail, and there's no gray area between. What does this mean? That means this is not a graded label. You will not have different classes such as gold class, silver class, or bronze class. You will just get a pass or get a fail. This slide shows you some of the commonly found Type 1 eco-labels around the world. They are all united in the global eco-labeling network in order to provide advanced environmental expertise and quality control among different members. For consumers, choosing them, those Type 1 eco-labels, is a guarantee for a better environment and health of future generations. And the certified manufacturers follow the environmental criteria, exclude toxic components, reduce and recycle waste, and protect the water and air. The Green Council is the organizer of the first and only Type 1 eco-label in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Green Label Scheme, which covers several plastic products to provide a creditable guide for consumers to purchase plastic products that have lower environmental impacts. The Green Label logo contains a unique certification code that will only appear on a certified product or associate advertisement and the packaging. Each certified product will have a validity of 3 years following the ISO practice. After that, the applicant has to carry out all tests again to renew the green label. All licenses can be checked on our Green Label Scheme website, which is greenlabel.org.hk. Now I will show you some commonly found Type 2 eco-labels regarding plastic and plastic packagings. I think some of you are familiar with them. The first one is the Mobius loop, which is a triangle composed of 3 arrows looping back on themselves in clockwise direction. This symbol indicates that a product can be recycled, but not necessarily that it has been produced from recycled materials. So sometimes it even has a percentage figure in the middle, indicating how much of the products comes from recycled materials. Another one is the plastic labeling system. Have you ever noticed on the bottom of your plastic product having one of these 7 triangular symbols? It's a number inside a recycling logo. In seeing a label like this, you may have thought, oh, it's nice, this product, it is recyclable. But I'm sorry to tell you that if you had that reaction, like most people who see that symbol and number, will be mistaken in your assumption. These labels have nothing to do with the recyclable nature of the plastic. Instead, the label has been used as an international standard to identify what type of plastic is used and to provide a uniform system for the identification of different polymer types. In fact, only a few plastic types are recyclable. I've met a countless number of people and friends who were shocked that this logo did not mean just please recycle me or similar meaning. You may recycle this plastic bottle. They were shocked to find out that large percentage of the product they were used to placing in the brown recycling bin was in fact being sorted and sent to landfill at the recycling center, because not all local facilities can handle all these 7 kinds of plastics. Another common type 2 logo is the green dot. A large proportion of the public may think that the green dot refers to the packaging of a product being recyclable. You may find this green dot commonly printed on your shampoo bottle or your detergent bottles. However, this is not the case for recyclable material. When you see the green dot on the packaging, it means that for such packaging, a financial contribution has been paid to a qualified national packaging recovery organization. So that means a company can label its packaging with the green dot label, even if the product is not recyclable and is not made from recycled products. So in conclusion, consumers are often looking at packaging in order to know how to properly dispose of the product. As you may see, the information provided on the above type 2 declarations to consumers are often unclear, and some manufacturers even create their own labels and claims without third-party verification. Type 1 eco-label can provide clear and reliable information and help consumers to make the easier choice. It links up environmentally concerned purchases with the manufacturers offering green products together. Last but not least, of course, it is always the best to completely eliminate the use of any unneeded plastic items. Switching from one type of plastic to another type of plastic cannot really solve the plastic pollution crisis that we are facing. Reusable packaging designs and a reduction in overall plastic use are much more promising strategies to keep plastic out of our landfills and the environment. Last, I would like to show you a video regarding the type 1 eco-label, so you may have a better understanding on this type 1 eco-label. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Responsible consumption and production is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations. In order to solve social and environmental problems, producers should reduce their environmental impact. Consumers, in turn, should buy more environmentally preferable products. A Type 1 eco-label is helpful in this case. To place this eco-label on their packaging, the producer must meet the most strict environmental criteria. The criteria are developed by professionals. They analyze all stages of the product life cycle, considering the most recent scientific data. For each product, they highlight the points of maximum impact on the environment and possibilities for reducing this impact. The producers follow the environmental criteria, exclude toxic components, reduce and recycle waste, and protect water and air. The ecological situation is improving as a result. It is possible in all industries worldwide. For consumers, choosing a Type 1 eco-label is the guarantee for a better environment and health of future generations. All this brings us closer to harmonic and sustainable development on Earth. There are 27 Type 1 eco-labels in the world. They can be found on almost all the continents. They are united into the global eco-labeling network in order to provide advanced environmental expertise and quality control. This powerful partnership is always ready to offer effective tools to allow responsible consumption and production for sustainable development.
Thank you, Stephen. Our second speaker is Dr. Christelle Locke. She is the Assistant Professor at the Earth Science Department and Swire Institute for Marine Science of the University of Hong Kong. Her focus are on the impacts of humans on marine environment, and recently she also focuses on the macroplastic and microplastic. Many years ago, when I was purchasing manager, I only heard about biodegradable plastic. But nowadays, there are too many non-conventional plastic to confuse me. Today, we have Dr. Locke to tell us about the myth and reality of sustainable plastic. Welcome, Dr. Locke.
Thank you. So my name is Christelle Locke. I'm a professor at the University of Hong Kong. Part of my research that I'm doing there focus on the plastic pollution. And particularly, I'm interested in the degradation of the big plastic pieces that we find in the environment into these small plastic pieces that we call the microplastic. So today, the focus of what I will present you, it's about the myth and the reality of sustainable plastic. So I would like to start with some definition. What are sustainable plastic? And we'll start with sustainable. So the capacity to be able to be regenerated is what we call a sustainable object or sustainable material. I would like to add something to that very broad definition. We want to have the material need to have the capacity to regenerate without impacting the environment. And this is really crucial to have product, material, or even lifestyle that are sustainable. If we focus in the plastic, we need to think at different stage of the plastic. First, its production, but also its usage and its end of life. In the presentation today, I will focus on the end of life because you will have information about production and usage and how this part of the plastic life are sustainable or not in the coming presentation. So first, I would like to discuss what are the different plastic that we can found in today's and have a focus on what the plastic that we call sustainable or that have been called sustainable. And they have a huge misunderstanding of all what of this sustainable plastic, or sometimes we call them at large bioplastic. But I think, and I want to focus on that now, bioplastic is a very particular type of plastic, and this word is usually used for a big group of plastic that are not necessarily, we'll say, bio-based plastic. So I will explain you all of these definitions. So first we start with conventional plastic, and these are all the plastic that we are very familiar with, and the first speaker I've mentioned with the different numbers. So all the plastic label 1, 2, up to 7 are what we call the conventional plastic, and I will get back to that just after. Then we can separate different type of plastic, the one we call bio-based plastic, that could be biodegradable or not. There's two options. We have the true, I will say, or the real bioplastic, and I will come back to that later. And we have also synthetic or fossil oil-based plastic that are biodegradable in opposition as the conventional one. And I will come back to all of these names just after, but one point that I want to focus here, it's all of these plastic, doesn't matter if they are based or made of biomolecule or fossil fuel molecule, all of them or most of them have additive in it. Additive or additional chemicals that are added to the plastic to give them their color or to give them their capacity to resist more to the light, for example. But all of them have this additive, and this is very important to understand and to consider when we think about their end of life. So let's have a quick look of why we talk about sustainable plastic. I think a lot of you are familiar with all the plastic debris that we see on the street or on the shore or even in the water. And why we have all of this plastic, and it's the reason we are thinking or we are developing what we aim or what we call sustainable plastic that potentially won't have these impacts, that we won't see in the environment. And again, I want to focus that I will discuss only what is linked to the waste mismanagement. And the waste mismanagement, that's what results in this presence of this plastic in the environment and the picture we see here. Another important definition to know, it's what is the degradation and what is the biodegradation. So the degradation is the transformation of big pieces into smaller pieces, ultimately that are pure molecule of water and carbon dioxide. This, when we call biodegradation, that it's done by bioorganisms, by living organisms as fungi or bacteria. The very important point on that few lines is all of the material are degradable or biodegradable. It's just a question of time. So it is really, really important that even a fossil or a conventional plastic will degrade very, but very, very slowly. We are talking about hundreds of years or even thousands of years. So the reason we have this accumulation over the last 40, 50 years in the environment, because it takes hundreds of years for them to degrade. So what we are looking is at options that can degrade faster, that they won't accumulate in the environment and they won't damage, for example, the marine life. And now you will see later they have several options there. An additional and important definition is we have now some plastic, some of these bio-based plastic that are degradable via composting. But again, we need to be very careful of what we are talking in terms of composting. Most of them are composting in an industrial composter, which have very clear settings. So very constant temperature, very high humidity, and high presence of oxygen. If we compare that with a home composting, this is not necessarily the case. So the capacity of a bio-based plastic to biodegrade in a home composter or in an industrial composter will be different. So it's very important to be precise when we talk about home or when we talk about composting. So briefly, these are the conventional plastic, the big five, you all probably all know them: PPP, PVC, PS, and PET. They are made of fossil fuel. So this is really the definition. They are very resistant, but also in the same time very malleable. So we can do a lot of things with them. What are the options in terms of end of life of this plastic? We can recycle them. We use them, recycle them. For example, in the world, approximately 10% of them are recycled. We can incinerate them, and this is another 10% of the plastic that is incinerated but have consequences in the air quality. And most of them are put in the landfill. And this is why we have this plastic pollution problem, because in the landfill, or just a liter in the environment, they will degrade in small pieces that we call microplastics. So just to give you an example, this styrofoam box, if you degrade it in pieces that are 5 by 5 millimeter size, what's the definition of the bigger microplastic, we will have 800 pieces in one bowl. If we now let them degrade it in small, very small plastic that we call, again, the lower definition of the microplastic, we'll have 20,000 pieces. And all of these small pieces end up into the water. So this is just a schematic of what are the microplastic that we found in Hong Kong waters. All of them were collected from the waters. So all these conventional plastic, they will stay in the environment for hundreds of years. in the form of microplastic. So what are the alternatives? We can look at what we call synthetic biodegradable polymer. So this type of plastic are fossil-based also plastic. They are made of the same of molecules that are produced from the fossil fuel. But there have been some chemicals have been added to it to make them biodegradable. And again, this is important to remember that we need to make the difference between home and industrial composting. So this type of polymers, so for example, the BPBAT, for example, are very are capable to degrade in industrial composter. So if the person who uses them is aware of that, then and if the industrial composting facilities are present where we are, then it's an alternative. A second type of plastic or bio-based plastic, we'll call them. It's the plastic that the building blocks, so the simple molecule, are made by organisms. But together, they are main polymers. So we bring them together to create long chain and material, which we call what we call the base of the plastic. So most of them are derived from biomolecule, sugar, but their composition of long chain is not made naturally. It's man-made. So it's the reason we should not call them bioplastic, but bio-based plastic. Some have the capacity to be degradable. And again, this is linked to the additional chemical that we have added into this long molecule of plastic. And some are not. Again, when we talk about a biodegradability of this bio-based plastic, this is really linked to the conditions that are needed to that. So it means that they are degradable or biodegradable in composter, where you have a certain temperature, where you have a certain quantity of microorganisms. There is few studies that compare their degradability in the soil or in the laboratory setting, and they are quite different. They will take a much longer time to degrade into the soil where you don't have a control environment. So again, we need to be careful when we use these alternatives because it really depends on the facility and how they are processed. The last one that I will say the true bioplastic, so they are derived from biopolymers, so the small building block, but also the long polymers, so the long chain that form the plastic are made from living organisms. And most of the time it's come from plants, and it's what we call starch. So they have different type of starch. Corn starch, I think, is the most popular one, but it could also be PHAs, and some are made by organisms, some can be man-made. So the PHAs, we need to be careful. Some are bio-based plastic and some are true bioplastic, and they are biodegradable. But again, I want to really emphasize that they are biodegradable in certain conditions. So again, what are the possibilities for the bioplastic end of life? First, and I think the first priority in terms of end of life, even for the bioplastic, will be a reuse. We should try to reuse them. We can also recycle them, but we need to be careful because when we have this bioplastic, the capacity to be recycled are different than the conventional plastic. So it's a different setting. So it's not that we can put all the plastic together and recycle that. It's really much more complex than that, and mix of different plastic give different or low quality recycled plastic. So they have a lot of complexity in the recycling of the plastic. We can compost them, but again, the ideal condition are an industrial composting. And if we don't have the industrial composting, then it means that it can take a very long time to degrade. And then we have waste incineration, as I mentioned, but again, we'll have some toxic molecule that can link to the additive, for example, that have been added to this plastic. And finally, where the bioplastic can be very important in terms of reducing what we see, the plastic that are present in the environment, is if they are capable to degrade or biodegrade in the natural environment, like in the ocean or in the forest. So what do we know about this option? I want to show you two examples. So one have been done by Plastic 3C, where they put several items. So these 4 different items of plastic, of bioplastic. So some are bio-based plastic, and some are biodegradable fossil fuel-based plastic. And they put them in the environment, in the water, in Hong Kong waters for several times. What are the results? And briefly just show you. So the first images show you when they deploy them. And then you have after 6 months and after 12 months. I don't show you the detail, but all of the items were still present and easily recognizable after 12 months. There were life attached to it. They have been, obviously we can see the color, some algae who grow on top of it, but they were all still there. So this is the first indication that what happened in the ocean water, for example, is different than the industrial composting. And we know that the condition, because the conditions are not perfect for biodegradation. Recently, we have been doing more work on bioplastic. So here it's a set of experiments that we just deployed a month ago. And we have different types of plastic. And the first 2 plastic are the cornstarch based plastic, so really pure bioplastic. The black one is one made of cassava plastic, and we have on the right we have oxo biodegradable plastic. So oxo biodegradable plastic are not bioplastic; they are fossil fuel based plastic. So again, it's really important to understand what are the meaning, the definition of the different type of plastic. So what do we observe? So we put them in Hong Kong waters, and we look at them on a daily basis. So this is after 2 weeks, and you can see that first, all of them are still there. So they don't disappear. It's not magic. They have no magic there. They don't disappear. They are still present. And most of them are still in a very good condition with no hole. There is some algae that have attached to it. There is some bacteria also that have attached to it. But something that is interesting but not surprised is the one on the right, where I have more white. This is the oxo biodegradable plastic. So again, this type of plastic will not degrade in the environment, and it will degrade in a very controlled condition in, for example, industrial composter. So my point is, it's really to be careful of the definition of the different type of plastic. And I will just conclude with these 3, I think, crucial points from my point of view. It's we need to be careful with the name and the composition. And it's very difficult to have very quickly an understanding of what they are made and what is their behavior. But it's critical to look at it a little bit more in detail if you want to have a clear choice. Then we need also to think about alternative of end of life. If we want to have a composter, or if we want to focus on degradable plastic, then we need to have the composter to take care of them. And really, the real bioplastic might be the solution to reduce the accumulation of plastic litter, and especially the microplastic in the ocean, but we still have not enough answer to see really what is the true behavior in different settings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Law. Thank you. Yeah, you give us a lot of insight on those kind of biodegradable or bioplastic. Our next speaker is Dr. Meike Sauerwein. She is the lecturer at the Division of Environment and Sustainability in the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Life cycle thinking and sustainable consumption are her focus. In the sustainable procurement, one of the best practice is to apply life cycle costing in making procurement decisions. Today, we have Meike to tell us the myth and reality of plastic alternative if life cycle thinking is applied. Welcome, Meike. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Felix, for the kind introduction, and thank you very much to the Green Council also for having me here today. As Felix already mentioned, I'm a lecturer at the Division of Environment and Sustainability at Hong Kong UST, and I mainly teach on life cycle assessment and sustainable consumption. So accordingly, today I would like to look more into the topic of the myth and reality of plastic alternatives, and I will look at it from a life cycle point of view. All right. Okay, so let's get started. When I ask my students in class, actually, what is the challenge, the biggest challenge in terms of environmental issues here in Hong Kong, most of the students instantly talk about waste, about filled up landfills. They talk about waste in the ocean, waste in our beaches. And as everybody knows, in the past months during this pandemic, we see that people order out food a lot more. So that is adding on to this already existing challenge of waste management and dealing with this kind of waste. And the Greeners Action group has been doing a survey, and it is really amazing that the increase in terms of takeaway is really, really big. So accordingly, we can see that single-use plastic is a big problem, and it became even more a problem in the past year. Now, if the Consumer Council in Hong Kong has been doing a survey a few years back, and they asked people what are the environmental challenges generally associated with consumption. And as we can see on the graphic that they put out, it's actually that people most of the time think about waste when they think about problems, consumption-related problems in Hong Kong or in general. Now, of course, this might be a reason because the waste is something so obvious to see. We see it in the streets, as Christelle already mentioned, in the streets, in the oceans, we see it everywhere. The other impacts that come from consumption are a little bit more hidden. Things like, for example, climate change, air pollution might be something that can be seen, but often they don't happen in Hong Kong. If we think about different kinds of products, they may happen elsewhere. And accordingly, for people in Hong Kong, it's less easy to see these kind of impacts and be aware of them, and accordingly to really judge what kind of products are sustainable and what are not. So we can clearly see direct impact is something that people are more aware of. Now, in order to understand better what makes a product sustainable, or if we want to shift away from plastic and shift away from this kind of end of life or disposal issues that we can see in Hong Kong, we need to consider the full life cycle of a product. So life cycle basically means different kinds of stages that every product has to go through. We can see here on this graphic, it's the life cycle of a detergent, and we can see that from making the raw materials, for example, here in this case, palm oil, going to processing, and then the production of the actual detergent, packaging it, bringing it to Hong Kong, then going into retail, into use, and then these are already the stages that we are more familiar with, things like using the detergent in our washing machine, and then releasing the rest of the detergent, what is left over, either into the sewage treatment, or the packaging goes into landfill most of the time. Now, this is something that every product does have a life cycle. However, most of us are only familiar with the stages that come from retail and after. So we don't see what is actually happening with these products earlier on. However, when we want to make good decisions in terms of what is sustainable, we should be looking into the entire life cycle. And that is also a suggestion that comes from the United Nations Environmental Assembly to say, when we are looking for alternatives for plastic, we should look into the entire life cycle of these kind of alternatives, because otherwise it might be that we are making something that produces less waste at the end of the life. So we are avoiding some of the implications that come with excessive littering, plastic in the ocean. But instead, we may be using a material that, for example, in its production stage causes a lot of other impacts, for example, climate change impacts, impacts on wastewater or toxicity. So this is something that we often call shifting the burden. So if we want to avoid certain problems, such as disposal on landfill, because our landfill sites are getting full, and we're thinking of how could we reduce that and reduce these kind of problems, we shouldn't just look into one stage, but all different stages, so that we are not shifting the problem from one stage to another, or from one environmental impact such as waste to another environmental impact such as climate change. Now, going more into this topic, life cycle assessment is basically assessing systematically this kind of life cycle of a product. So you can see on the right-hand side, this time is a real cycle, the life cycle stages that we just saw. And the benefit, or what life cycle assessment is basically doing, it's systematically looking into each of these stages, like what kind of energy or what kind of resources go in, and at the same time, what kind of emissions or waste come out from every single stage. So the key concept here is to think about all life cycle stages should be addressed, and not just, for example, the end of the life. Also, it helps us to really dig deeper into the data and to say, like, okay, in what stage is actually most of the energy, most of the resources consumed, and where do most of the emissions or most of the waste come out? And accordingly, this allows us to address these kind of so-called hotspots and make better decisions in where can we reduce environmental impacts. Now, I know that certain environmental impacts like air pollution or waste is something that we can see relatively easily and also measure or quantify relatively easily. But when it comes to other environmental impacts, it might be not as easy. So when we look into life cycle assessment, some of the common emissions that we try to quantify are, for example, greenhouse gases, particulate matter or smog, or aerosols, as many people call them. We look into acidic gases in the air that can form acid rain and then cause soil acidification or water acidification. Also, toxicity might be some aspects. So the key of life cycle assessment is because we have so many different kind of chemicals that even for making one product, we need a lot of different chemicals, and we may have a lot of different emissions. So life cycle assessment is trying to aggregate these data and collect what are the data, what are the chemicals that are released from making this product, and accordingly, what would be the impact for humans from this kind of, toxicity point of view. So something can be very low in toxicity, but we use it a lot, or we release a lot. Something may have like a high toxicity, and even though we use very little of it, it may have a similar impact. So life cycle assessment can help with these kind of judgments. And similarly, it's including resource use, things like how much land do we need in order to produce something, or how much fossil fuels. Funny enough, or interesting enough, actually not that funny, plastic in the ocean or plastic waste, or generally waste, is something that is currently not included in traditional life cycle assessment because it's something that is pretty complex to identify. All right, so given that our consumers don't know most of these kind of information, what comes from the assessment of products, there is a study from a Dutch group, and they have been asking a few hundred students on the following. They gave them different kind of packaging for the same product, and they asked them, which kind of packaging do you think is the most sustainable? Included are, for example, plastic pouch, liquid cartons, like these kind of Tetra Pak, glass jars, bioplastic pots, cans. So you can see different kind of them, and maybe you want to take a second and think about which one do you think would be the most sustainable one. And then I go ahead and let you know what most of the students were answering. So most of the students thought that the glass jar is best, and even better than that, the bioplastic pot. And they thought that the dry carton sachet, so if you make the tomato soup into dry powder and then put it into a small bag and then put it again into like some kind of carton, they thought that this one might be one of the worst ones, and also cans. So if you're using aluminum cans, for example. Now, this research group, they also dig into the data and try to match it up with life cycle assessment data. And what they found is that exactly the opposite of what people thought would be best. So this dry powder in the carton sachet actually had the best environmental performance. And the weakest ones were actually for the glass jar and the bioplastic pot. And for the can, actually also it has like a pretty high environmental impact, and therefore the students were quite right about that. So this is something that we can see Unfortunately, in the study, they didn't mention or they didn't ask the students why they think like that. But I did the same assessment in my class with my students here in Hong Kong, and the students also come up with the same perception that glass jars and bioplastic might be the best one. So accordingly, we can see from this study that consumers often, they don't have a clear knowledge of what is it that makes something sustainable or not, and they may make a judgment based on the wrong information. So I came up with a list of misconceptions that might be related to that, because people don't know enough about the product packagings. So for bio-based materials, some of the assumptions might be, for example, it doesn't depend on fossil fuels to make it. Accordingly, it should be more sustainable. Or it is natural, somewhat bio, so it should be better for the environment. When the plants are growing, they are taking up CO2, so it could be even carbon neutral, or at least have less carbon emissions. If it's bio, it's not synthetic, so it might be that there are no chemicals involved. It disappears because it can decompose, so biodegradable could be something that people think it may no longer exist in the environment and may just be gone. And in terms of glass, some of the students mentioned it doesn't decompose, so the other way around compared to plastic, so it doesn't contribute to things like microplastics or general, is not perceived as being as polluting, even if it gets into the environment. And lastly, students said if it's reusable or recyclable, it might be more environmentally friendly. So I want to try to answer a few of these kind of misconceptions in the following, and give you the questions give you the misconceptions at the very end again to see which ones you can identify as wrong, or whether you can identify them as wrong. So I brought here a study which was actually just published in the last month, and it's comparing single-use straws with reusable straws. And the materials they are looking into was a plastic straw made from polypropylene, paper, glass, steel, and bamboo straw. And I want to draw your attention here, and this is something generally, if you look at life cycle data, to keep in mind that if we make a comparison like this, the weight of each of these kind of materials is different. And accordingly, something that is heavier normally tends to have more impacts. So that just keep that in mind. If you see comparisons, people may use different kind of weight or different kind of products that they're comparing. So it's worthwhile looking into the details. Also for the reusable ones, the assumption here is that steel can be used the most often, 500 times. Bamboo may get scratchy and a bit less nice to use after 50 times. And glass may be longer, but may also break. So the assumption here was 100 times to be reused. And also for the reusable ones, they included the bag, because people would normally not carry it around just in their handbag like this. So they would need some sort of packaging that they can reuse, and the brush. So very quickly, run over the life cycle stages of these kind of products, just to give you an overview what is included in their assessment. So we can see the first one for the plastic straw. The upper part, highlighted in brown, is basically what they need in order to make the packaging of the straw. So here it was assumed that it's a thin plastic film made from low density polyethylene. And then the key aspects here would be to also mention that everything was assumed that it's going to landfill. So it's something actually quite similar to Hong Kong. And by the way, this study was done in Brazil. So it's a Brazilian life cycle assessment. For the paper straw, we can also see the brown part is similar to the plastic. So it's all wrapped in some sort of thin film. And one thing to highlight here again is that for the plastic straw, our raw material would be crude oil. So it's fossil fuel based. And for the paper straw, it would be wood. And we can see here the paper straw, we can see at the lower end, the paper straw go through a couple of processing steps as well. So it's not that paper is coming from the environment, but it needs to undergo also quite a lot of processing in order to get this kind of paper pulp out of the wood. Now, very quickly to the reusable ones. Here we have, besides the packaging, which is here a cotton bag for all of the three reusable ones. we can see that besides that, we also need equipment for washing. So we can see the mining process for the tin wire and the nylon for making the brush, the cleaning brush. And on the right-hand side, we can see the tap water and detergent going in. And in green highlighted is the actual, making the actual straw. The same is true for glass and for bamboo. We have this packaging and the cleaning utensils. And here to highlight is that the steel as well as the glass are coming from some sort of mining processes to get the ore as well as the sands used for the steel and the straw. And the bamboo is based on bamboo wood, as shown on the bottom here. Okay, now let's jump into the results. Maybe you can think about it for like 2 seconds as well. Which one you would think is the most sustainable one? So we had, one more time here, the selection of plastic, paper, glass, steel, bamboo. All right, so let's jump to there and see the results. So first of all, the plastic and paper, so the single-use ones as a comparison. For the graph on the left-hand side, please have a look at the blue area and compare it to the purple area. So you can see the impacts on different kinds of impacts surrounding the circle. And I want to highlight a few. So generally, we can see that from 0 to 100, for most of the impact categories, paper has more impacts than plastic. And I highlight just a few. For example, land use, we see that making the pulpwood requires a lot more land because we need the wood to grow. And accordingly, something to think about is as well, making this wood, and given that it requires so much land, thinking about where the wood comes from is something very important here to keep in mind. Other things would be climate change, because paper is decomposing on landfill. We need to keep in mind the energy demand, which is also higher for processing the paper compared to the plastic straw. And similarly for human toxicity, the chemicals that we use for making the paper is also has a higher impact. So we don't see it in this study over here, but generally what other studies were mentioning is that for paper, even though here it has a worse performance, the performance would improve if we would send the paper instead of landfill for recycling. It might not get better than plastic, but it definitely gets reduces the impacts quite a lot. Now, very quick look into the reusable straws. We can see overall on the brown area, which is the overlay of red and green, as well as the gray area. I'm not sure whether it's very clear to see. We can overall see that in terms of water depletion, climate change, and energy demand, they have a significantly higher impact compared to the single-use one. But also what we can see here is that steel seems to be performing better than bamboo and glass. However, I want to draw your attention again to the following, that in terms of the reuse, we see that the steel straw by default was set to 500 times use, the glass straw to 100 times, and bamboo 50 times. If we would all use only 50 times, and it's something probably happening in Hong Kong, people get a bit tired of their materials very quickly. So if we would set them as the same amount, bamboo would be performing best, followed by glass, followed by steel. And another thing to mention here is that actually most of the impacts are coming from the packaging and the detergent and the water cleaning. So it's not the material itself that may make these kind of impacts, but it is included in the assessment. So let me go a bit faster, even though I'm already going fast, to very quickly highlight a few more points on bio-based plastics, as Christelle was already mentioning, just to highlight a few more life cycle aspects. So the first one is on raw materials. People think bio-based means natural. And I intentionally highlight over here that our agricultural processes are generally based on using a lot of fertilizers and pesticides. So therefore, it's not all natural. And these kind of chemicals that we are using are also coming from fossil fuels and go through chemical processing. But in addition to that, we need more land, we need energy for making these kind of agricultural products besides water. Another thing, and we mentioned that already for paper, is that we need land. And especially if it comes from a country like Brazil, for example, as we just talked about, if we have a lot of pristine forests and a lot of natural ecosystems, and we are converting them into agricultural land in order to make bio-based plastics, for example, that would be something that also has an impact on the environment. So this might not be a good thing. Lastly, to pay attention to the feedstock. Christelle was mentioning about corn. I think from corn, for example, you could use the starch as well as the corn stover. So it is actually, there are different kind of feedstocks or different kind of raw materials that people can use for making bio-based plastics. Now, the idea behind here is you could either use a product that, for example, could otherwise be used for eating, or you can use waste products, like, for example, the leftovers from sugarcane syrup, like bagasse, for example. So when you're looking into bio-based plastics, it might be something interesting to look into what is the feedstock that actually is used. Similarly, for processing, different feedstocks may use different kinds of processing steps. So the maturity of the technology can significantly impact how much impacts come from bioplastics. And last but not least, end-of-life considerations. PLA, so one of the bio-based plastics, normally if they can decompose, they will release some sort of methane in the process, or CO2, depending on where they are put. So if they are put on landfill, for example, compared to PET, they are not preferable. Also, they have generally a low recyclability, or worst case, people may mix them up with other plastics and put them into the wrong bin, which is in a system like Hong Kong, where we have very little recycling facilities, it might be a problem if we do the sorting manually. Okay, I will jump over this one a little bit. This was an analysis about glass, comparing it to other kind of containers, and maybe just to highlight a few aspects over here is glass is generally very heavy, so it does come with heavy impacts. It requires a lot of energy in terms of the processing in order to melt down these kind of sands and make them into glass. So accordingly, the process is very energy intensive, and even recycling glass requires a lot of energy, and that normally brings up the emissions from glass. So if it's single use, it's definitely not a preferable one. Okay, so you can think about these misconceptions and have another look over it, and which of these you still think are actually true and which ones might be incorrect. Maybe to take the very last one, reusable and recyclable glass. So yes, glass might be reusable, but think about if your product is something that people may not reuse, like a jar for jam or for peanut butter. It may be reusable, but people in Hong Kong may simply not do it because they don't have any use for this kind of containers. So consumers may have wrong perceptions. It might be necessary to communicate better what is the actual environmental benefit. And also consumers are the ones who decide what happens with these products. So if it's something that needs to be reused in order to have a benefit, like glass, steel, aluminium, then it's something you would really need to think about, whether the consumers are really willing to do that, or whether you want to educate that or accordingly not implement this kind of product. Okay, so to sum this up, here are a couple more important characteristics that you may want to pay attention to when it comes to environmental impacts. Things like, for example, the size, the weight. So when you're switching away from plastic, many of the products are more heavy, accordingly very likely to have a higher impact. So minimizing the weight is a good way to think about it. Maturity of the processes, feedstock, I think we have already covered that. Transportation distances, especially if it's very heavy in terms of the packaging, like glass, might be something that comes into play when we talk about Hong Kong, where everything is imported or many things are imported. And last but not least, landfill emissions or capture or recycling infrastructures. If the local market is not allowing the consumer to do recycling or to reuse something, then it's something, of course, would not make sense to try to implement that. Okay, so beware of these kind of things. Try to avoid burden shifting. And when it comes to life cycle assessment, it's a very good tool. It's not available for all products that are in the market. But if you find life cycle assessment studies, they can be really helpful in terms of giving more of a direction in order to make decisions and to learn more about the products and to look more into their life cycle and accordingly what kind of impacts they have. Okay, so I would refer you to these kind of references here that were just published last year, and they are summaries of different kind of life cycle assessment reports published in the about these kind of single-use plastics. So if you go for UN environmental programs, search for them, I think you're likely to find them. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Meike. Yes, you also give us a lot of issue highlight. And Dr. Locke tell us about the issue of degradable plastic. And then you tell us about the issue of replacement of plastic. It's good. It seems that both of you create a lot of issue to us in consideration. Now we have another speaker. Then I would like to see how this speaker that they can solve all those kind of complicated issue. Our next speaker is Ms Suzanne Cheung. She is the head of sustainability, leading the public affairs and communication department of Swire Coca-Cola Hong Kong. Swire Coke has launched their sustainable development strategy on beverage packaging. We look forward to seeing her presentation on their sustainable packaging journey. Welcome, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you, Felix. Hi, everyone. I'd like to introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Suzanne Cheung. I'm now currently work for Swire Coca-Cola Hong Kong, which, if in case you don't know, a lot of Coca-Cola's beverages you drink every day actually produced locally. And I'm actually situated at the production plants in Sha Tin. And before I joined Swire, actually, I've been working a lot of NGOs and consultancy. Some of them are very esteemed organizations like WWF and Green Council. And I'm very happy to be back and share with you on my journey and my contribution towards the sustainable packaging in Hong Kong. There's a reason why I joined Swire. Swire is a serious company on sustainability, and because of my background, and I will only go for a company that really serious about sustainability. Just to give you some perspective of what Swire Coca-Cola is, so you know the scale and perspective we have, and the amount of seriousness and effort we put in deciding our package offer. In case you didn't know, Swire Coca-Cola is originated in Hong Kong. We were here for 55 years already. Our initial plant was in Korea Bay, and now we're situated in Sha Tin for almost 30 years. And apart from Hong Kong, Swire Coca-Cola actually have different markets. Our relationship with Coca-Cola is we are their partners. And Coca-Cola is a brand, and Swire Coca-Cola, who is franchised to have rights for manufacturing, selling, and distributing Coca-Cola's beverages across different markets in Hong Kong, Taiwan, part of mainland China, and part of America. In the whole Coca-Cola scope all over the world, we are the 5th largest bottling partner of Coca-Cola. So by no means we are any small. We're offering different types of beverages, serving over 7 million people. So our choice is making a big impact. So we are very cautious about it and try to balance between different needs. Now here is a general scope of types of beverages we have. This is not all of them. We have at least 60 brands, but we have different type of beverages. The one that you're on the top left-hand corner, you know very best, our beloved Coca-Cola. We got juice, teas, energy drinks, water, from all you see here. So we have a very different offer manufacturing. From our term, we have still products, which is not carbonated like water. We have carbonated drinks, which, like I mentioned, like the Coca-Cola you drink on a regular basis. We have juice, we have coffee, we even have wellness drinks, which is quite unusual in the rest of the world, like the Hafu Chou you drink when you pick up from the health works. So we do everything. We actually 煲茶, as in 煲涼茶 in our plant. So that's quite unique and interesting. So different markets, different needs. So that's our offering in Hong Kong. Right. I want to give you a perspective of how Swire Coca-Cola sees sustainability. Like I mentioned earlier, we know the impact, positive or negative, we could make. So there is a balance. There's a balance between our product offering, the product need, our planet, the environmental impact and possible benefit mentioned by the two doctors, and people, and how we contribute to the community, how we can help the community. So it's all sustainability perspective, not just environment. But environment, undeniably, is very, very, very important. So you will see our tagline for our sustainability is our choice, our future. What that means is we, as an organization, we have to balance different needs. Our customer needs, our production needs, our packaging perspective in terms of benefits and impact to different types of stakeholders, to the environment, and balancing all together, make our choice to have a sustainable future. So that's our philosophy in terms of any of our actions, apart from climate change, the water use and mentioned within the life cycle analysis, packaging and waste, all these sort of factors. Even not just about LCA. LCA sometimes is very, very embracing, but sometimes in some sense, like the two doctors mentioned, sometimes when it's linked to the environmental impact in terms of life cycle is very difficult to estimate. So that is a whole sweep of factors when we choose and decide what to do. We're not necessarily always making the best option, but it is our job to find the best option in balancing all the needs. Some of the past achievement we have, just to tell you that we haven't just started, but more than a decade ago. And some of you might have remember, as mentioned by Dr. Knott, we have been using plant-based plastic back in about around 10 years ago. And we did that in a combination of lightweighting. So our material impact, as Dr. Sauerwein mentioned, weight is a key factor. So our company is very conscious about light weighting, because no matter what package we use, the more heavy it is, the more impact will be. So we know that a long time ago, we got a whole list of experts on plastic and in terms of packaging design. That's what we did. And that's been happened 10 years ago. For example, our classic Aqua water bottle, different part has been reduced, different percentage of plastics all over the years. Some part we have been reduced over almost 40%. So that is a lot of technological breakthrough that we need to do in terms of design, in terms of stability, in terms of physical strength, in terms of production challenges. So you can imagine there's a lot of collaboration between our team to do that. Obviously, procurement colleagues like you guys have to do a lot of contribution, and I'm so grateful to that, and I'm so hopeful to exchange with you guys if you have some good exchange with me. And not just in terms of plastic, but also in terms of other packaging. As mentioned by Dr. Sauerwein, the metal also have very high environmental impact, and we knew that. We know it's highly recyclable, but the carbon footprint is very high. So what we did, we also to lightweighting. We try to, if you try to buy our drinks and buy our other brands' drinks, drink it, empty it, weight it, you will find our aluminum cans much lighter. So that is our own effort. Same goes with other beverages. Like I mentioned, the stability, the in terms of easy to open. Some people say, wow, your cap is so thin, hard to open. So in that sort of sense, we need to put a lot of changes and a lot of feedbacks, user feedback to make that. Nonetheless, we try to use more package less option, like for example, in our green events or all events we sponsor, we try to sponsor carboy. So in that sort of sense, use less, plastic. But I must say, we face a lot of challenge right now. For example, we do donation of water to quarantine camps. They say, no, thank you. We don't want carboy. We don't want people to touch it. Please give us bottled water. Nothing we can do, but health and safety first. Sometimes there is other factors that so when you are choosing different format, there are other considerations you need to make. So that's something that I need to share. But I'm really glad that our effort is recognized externally. Back in 2 years ago, 2018, we got a very prestigious environmental award in Hong Kong, and we got a gold award for our industry. This is a recognition of the amount of dedication and effort all our team has been doing. Just to give you a perspective about Choi's Our Future, like I mentioned, we have different aspects, different areas, different targets. A lot of final choice is I have to work very closely with procurement colleagues to try to make a right choice. And obviously, environmental sustainability or other sustainability factor is a key consideration factors. So, but when just I mentioned, just to bring out about the pandemic, actually, as a procurement officer, you make a big difference in terms of the impact of the organization because the material you buy, the service you use. So do listen to Felix. He will give you a lot of advice. But like I mentioned, not just carbon footprint that you need to worry about. The local situation, for example, infrastructure that are able to handle your waste. Just mentioned about the study about the packaging, about perception of packaging, and the one that in the study was about the best one according to LCA is about paper carton, the paper packaging. If I'm not wrong, right? The paper packaging in Hong Kong, I will argue that because there is no recycling facility can handle them properly. Okay, so that is very related to Hong Kong situation. So when we make the choice as a professional, we not only just look at just the sales tell you what, but you have to look at your user requirement, your SOP. If you're running a restaurant, what is the SOP of your staff? For example, if you work in a fast food outlet, or you buy stuff for a fast food outlet, oh, they say, good, we sell you aluminum cans. You should be asking who's going to do recycling. Any with fast food restaurant now, they have a recycling bin for separate recycling. Well, that's the thing that you need as a smart procurement officer be thinking about in your operation. The offering given to by the sales, by the product provider, does it make sense in your organization? I'll give you an example. Glass, supposedly you use many times, is good, very good environmentally. But just mentioned, maybe better than plastic, to be quite honest, if you use it more than enough. But there are safety issues. For example, we cannot sell glass drinks to theme park. Very simple, health and safety reason. What if somebody drop a glass bottle on the floor? So that causes health and safety issue. So when you make decisions in terms of what can be best in terms of sustainability for your organization, you need to think about all those factors. And one thing I like to highlight here, and we see a lot of our customers fall into this very wrong trap, is about those, fandango super plastics or something that is degradable, or oh, we are the best. I am quite aligned with that. So we have to think. But also, a lot of times, a lot of companies, because they have a very strong mandate to avoid plastic, and they will do whatever to buy something else. For example, I'd rather have water to be packaged in aluminum cans, or water packaged in even paper carton. Now that is wrong. To me, I will tell them the life cycle impact of a single-use aluminum can and carton actually are higher than plastic, as you just seen from the results. Don't get me wrong, each pack type had their own use. Just like I mentioned, a glass bottle is reusable, but have health and safety concern and storage implications. Plastic is lightweight, have lower carbon footprint, but people scare of them because nowadays they have mandate to reduce plastics, and they might leak to environment and cause other environmental impact. And carton seems more friendly, but Hong Kong have problem with a recycling carton. We just started, but we have lots of challenge in that. And each type have their advantage and disadvantage. And you as a procurement officer should educate yourself and think about what's best for your organization. Okay, just to give you a summary on what we committed in terms of moving along our packaging. Like I said, we already done a lot, but there are areas that we want to do even better. As an organization, we are really determined to be more sustainable and be a leader of the industry. We use a 4-point strategy in deciding our plastic packaging: reduce, redesign, recover, and recycle. Just talk about reduce, because I think in terms of the whole scheme of environmental impact, reducing, just like the doctors mentioned, is the best. We try to use refillable and reusable option as far as we can. As mentioned, we do have a portfolio of returnable glass, and because we don't have the problem in getting back, because we have the deposit system. In case you didn't know, we get the deposit back for people returning glass bottles. So our returnable glass returnable rate is pretty high. So we use them again and again and again and again. And when we can't use it anymore because they're broken or they are just horrible, then we just send it for recycling. In Hong Kong, the recycling have less energy impact because we just break it down and replace for river sand for reclamation, in case you didn't know. So it's quite relatively energy less demanding. We have water that is in carboy, things drinks that your Coca-Cola drink in a restaurant. A lot of times it's come with post-mix tank, which is the steel tank here, which is reusable and washable. And we have new production lines coming up that can further reduce the plastic. And one thing that is quite new to the market is that we even try to have a package less options. We have vending machines that can dispense a very safe quality water to the general public, and we call them water stations. We currently have about 100 in the market. If you see the right hand bottom corner, the 4 machine, the 3 machine on the left are the 3 different sizes for people, for venues have different needs. And I must say our water station is particularly popular in outdoors, like hiking trails. In case you are a hiking lover, you've probably seen our water stations alongside a hiking trail. The one on the right actually is a very, very new one. We're trying out right now, and we're still a very experimental stage. It dispenses beverage, flavored beverage like Coca-Cola. So we want to see if people be willing to bring their own bottles, bring their own cup, and buy a fizzy drink happily. A lot of people might not used to it, but we are experimenting. We want to see how the market react to it and see whether we can develop this sort of solutions to the general public. We design, like I mentioned, we try very much to redesign our package and try to reduce the impact for even different packaging. But because of different occasion, you might choose different packaging format. But even for each packaging, we try. And our mandate should first to make it very recyclable, and a very big majority of our packaging are readily recyclable. But at the same time, we try to use recycled material within our packaging. Our water bottle for the 770 ml, 500 ml, and 1.5 liter produced in Hong Kong, already using 100% recycled plastic, which means they collect plastic from the market and make it into new bottles. We're starting to produce fizzy drinks that is small bottles below 600 ml using 25% of recycled plastic. And because colorless plastic have the highest recycling value, we change our classic Sprite bottle from green to transparent, just to show our determination in the system to move to a more sustainable option. We do have a very small proportion of packaging that is not currently recyclable, which is our Aquarius powder pouch. If you are a sports person, you might use that. And we have been determined to change it into recyclable option, and hopefully we can soon load it out to the market. Just to follow on about the controversial about bioplastic, compostable plastic, in that sort of sense, we already have mandate do not use those type of plastic, because in Hong Kong, infrastructure just simply do not allow it. And we don't use PVC, which is very difficult to recycle. I wouldn't go through too much about Recover. If you've been recycling a recycle fanatic, you will have seen our reverse vending machine, which is extremely popular. But I want to tell you that we are serious about getting back the bottles for recycling and going back to make our own bottle. We are so serious. We are one of the very selected beverage manufacturers in Hong Kong that are willing to invest in recycling industry. And in Tuen Mun, we're going to have a PET bottle, which is our drinks bottle recycling plant, that's going to be open very soon. That company is called Liu Life Plastics, and if you're interested, I think they might be open soon. When they open, they might be soon welcome people to visit. Fantastic facility, state-of-the-art recycling, and which aim to collect the bottles you drink, those you put into the recycling bin, and they will turn it into a food-grade plastic for PET, so that then we go back into raw material for any type of food packaging, including our drinks. That is our willingness and determination to do true circular economy. And I think that's my presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne. Now we shall come to our panel discussion and Q&A. If you have any question, please drop to us at the question box. We shall try to answer. And in addition, the panel speaker will also discuss about how can procurement make smart decision in single-use plastic. Having listened to the sharing from four speakers, I believe all of the audience should be more knowledgeable and should not be easily greenwashed by their supplier. Okay. Now we start. Yeah. And thank you for all the speakers. You have given us a very insightful idea on how to handle plastic. And it's very good to understand more about the reality, myth, and challenge for shifting from the so conventional plastic. But it seems that it's still not easy to make a smart procurement decision, especially, I believe, when all those alternatives you mentioned are always at a higher cost. Yeah. And then may I ask your advice when making procurement decision for single-use plastic? What should be the most important consideration and what should be avoided? Maybe I start with Dr. Locke first.
Okay, so I have two, I think, suggestions. One is first to make sure what type of plastic you are using. So to make sure what is there, and then, or what you're using, what you're selecting, and then see where you are. Because as also Susan mentioned, it really depends where will happen your end-of-life product. And in some places, incineration is an option, in some it's not. So your selection will depend of where is your market and what are the solutions in terms of end-of-life for the plastic, for example, is there.
Suzanne?
I think it quite depends on the industry. I think if I can put a general comment, the best thing is to find a way to reduce plastics. And I think it quite depends on your organization. For example, I know hotels because they have more mandates. It's easier for them to attract customer. It's not the cost you're reducing, it's the value you created for your customer, and try to see, a lot of customers nowadays are more environmentally conscious. So it's not about getting cheaper a lot of time. It's about getting the value added so you can attract your customers. So my suggestions is to evaluate it. What sort of, is that the material you buy? Is a major material you buy? Will they have a major impact? If so, find a way to reduce a plastic. I'm not saying that you won't fall into the alternative. The alternative, I think in Hong Kong, if I know Hong Kong context a bit better, I would say don't fall into those traps, full stop, just full stop, okay? So, and in that sort of sense, that in finding alternative, that you might need to work harder. Is it the mandate of your company to reduce environmental impact on plastic? Is that your mandate to do? Sometimes you have to rely on your top management's direction and try to rely on it to make a better choice, because that you might need to work with, just like I mentioned about restaurant, you might need to work with your operation to change the SOP. How determined it is. If it's not that determined, find an option with less plastics. Maybe it helps. Maybe just simply for example, one of the quick service restaurants in Hong Kong already have mandate, don't have they have paper cup. Unfortunately, they can't change it, but they don't sell you with the lid. So the SOP is don't give you the lid. So you save money. I'm not saying you try to be stingy, but you save the environment, and you can tell your customer that you make the right choice. That's my suggestions.
Yeah, to try to change the culture of the customer is very important. To change the culture of the consumer, try to somehow, we're always talking about education, but there must be some kind of incentive or some kind of slightly penalty such that you can change their culture. Okay, then. Okay.
Well, I agree actually with what was already said. I think it's really important, if you want to switch to other plastics, to look carefully into whether these kind of plastics are really recyclable, for example, in Hong Kong, whether they have an actual benefit in Hong Kong, especially we talked about bioplastics, to really think about where they come from, and they may not have as much of a benefit as it is claimed, or as it might have in other systems in other countries. So look into the materials that you're using, but I fully agree with what has been said. Like, no product is always the best product in terms of the environmental point of view. There's no product that is beneficial for the environment. Everything has some sort of impacts. There is no such product as like a real green product. So reducing weight, reducing the product in general, giving incentives to do so is a very good way to go, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen.
This is really a hard question, but I would like to write on Suzanne's comments. I think communication with the staff is also another important issue, because sometimes they may not understand your reasons why you choose to switch to another kind of materials. Just like Suzanne mentioned, in some industry, experience or time sometimes are an important factor rather than environmental impact. So I think as the top management of a company, they may need to rethink their process, whether it is necessary to use that plastic items, or can that procedures can be reduced or streamlined into other procedures to replace it. Yeah, so I think that's important.
Okay, we have some question. One of the questions is come from Mr. Tim Parker. Can I ask, what is the best option for food taking out based on life cycle analysis? Mickey?
Yeah, well, I guess there have not been really life cycle studies done in Hong Kong. So accordingly, it would be really dependent on, if you look into life cycle studies, there are some who say it might be better to go for anything that has recycled content inside, things that have paper inside, if it's possible to recycle it. I think with food, it's a little bit tricky, because often the containers are contaminated. So even for paper, if it's oily from like a pizza carton, it may not be easy to recycle that if during the processing. So in that sense, in terms of food packaging, I think there are different things to think about. One, in terms of recycling, unless people know how to recycle and really wash it, put it into the correct bin, and have this kind of convenience also to find these kinds of bins around, it might be to go for trying to use less packaging. And I think also, generally, when it comes to food, there might be options in terms of getting people to reuse containers or bring them along, maybe not during this pandemic right now, but overall it's something that people might get used to more, as they like to take away a lot. And if people don't bring their own container, maybe there are ways to provide reusable containers, deposit them and bring them back next time. That might be options too.
And there's a follow-up is the reusable container better than single-use plastic? Or yeah, I think so. Yeah, and if so, what is the best material for reusable container, like plastic, stainless steel, or bamboo?
Yeah, it depends on how often you use them. In terms of life cycle assessment based on different kinds of studies, normally it says that for glass, it needs the most often time to be reused. It doesn't, if we look at it from a climate change point of view. When we look into the life cycle and other impacts, I think aluminium, for example, may come with other impacts as well in terms of toxicity, for example, in terms of the mining. So in that sense, reuse the more the better. So if you have the feeling that your consumers would be willing to do so, then that's a good thing. However, we do see in Hong Kong that, for example, bring your own bottle in our university. Students do have their own bottle and they use them, but students don't only have one bottle. They normally have several bottles. So overall, in that sense, plastic has the lowest impact. I think if you look into the overall impacts, plastic like PP, it has the lowest impacts going up through steel up to glass. I'm not so sure in terms of bamboo. I didn't see that for bottles, containers like that.
Yeah. Another question maybe for Suzanne is, any recycle plan of Swire for the commercial user, such as hotel?
I think as a beverage manufacturer in Swire Coca-Cola Hong Kong, we will try to work very closely with our customers, hoteliers alike, to offer the right solutions. Like, for example, there are hotels who are very keen to rid of plastic because they've been evilized. I think sometimes we got evilized too much. People make stupid decisions. Personally, just like what I mentioned. But we do have different options. For example, we have packageless options. We have package options, which is returnable. For example, with glass bottles, is returnable. And unfortunately, they used to use more water within our operation to wash it. But in terms of whole life cycle, probably you find it, your customer will perceive it as the most environmental friendly ones. I mean, you have to do the full life cycle analysis to prove one another. So like mentioned, each type are different. Aluminium itself is quite readily recycled, but if you work in the hotel industry and you want to work out plastic recycling, contact me. I will contact you with New Life Plastic. They're very willing to work with you in terms of really custom-made collection scheme.
Okay. This is a bit more easy to answer. If my company would like to establish a sourcing plan on the plastic item, what is the key element that we need to consider?
I can only speak for beverage because I know the best. But I think in general, I think as mentioned by Dr. Sauerwein, there are some reference. Sorry, you have to go a little bit technical. You have to go a little bit nerdy. Look at some already. There are plenty of study about plastics. So different packaging have, or different types of plastics have different impact simpler one like ours, because it's quite simple one, that you can easily find. I mean, if you want to buy drinks and look for better options, obviously buy us. We are very sustainable. Sorry about, yeah, but joke aside, you have to look at what type of stuff like that. If you use complex plastic, for example, no matter which individual plastic is recyclable, it's a waste of time. Because if you give it to recyclers, say, yeah, forget it, not worth the money. So it quite depends on your product offering. Is that a complex product? Is that a single product? When you work with your designer, can you make it into eco design, make it each component more recyclable? The component itself is recyclable. If it's just plastic, obviously it depends on what type of offering you have. Whether it's contaminated, if it's a food packaging. So I can't say I can offer a lot, but you can imagine that is a very complicated business. If you make a computer, for example, the plastic component is so complicated, it's wrapping here, wrapping there, it's no one easy solution. If you're doing simpler packaging, thankfully I am, that you can make a lot of choice that actually very positively impact bring a lot of positive impact in terms of sustainability. But my advice is you might need to speak to professionals like, Felix, and see whether, they can point you in the right directions. So yeah, my advice.
Maybe I can also copy the learning from Dr. Locke. That is, I think the sourcing plan, one of the major important criteria is durability. The plastic, I think all of the speakers will agree that yes, you should solve the plastic for a long-term durability. That is very important. And the trouble nowadays we face is talking about single-use plastic that we already discussed about is the single-use. I heard another speaker that is what she mentioned is plastic is not evil. Plastic can the development of plastic, in fact, is at least from the study of Dr. Meike, that is plastic itself is the lowest carbon footprint. That is, if we don't have plastic, okay, there will be a lot of trouble. Like, say, for example, deforestation, we need to maybe have a lot of wood. But the thing is, that is, if we can use the plastic appropriately as long as possible, and we use them, recycle them, I think it's it should be the right approach. But when we do with I think the seminar or the webinar on for this is the trouble is on the single-use plastic. We don't want if you're talking about the environmental impact, the trouble is on a lot of single-use plastic is disposed in the landfill, and some little in the ocean, in the ocean environment, which is not the wish of us. But the thing is, somehow it's very difficult to prevent it. Then the solution might become too degradable. But as mentioned by Dr. Locke, degradable is very challenging. It depends on a lot of the so-called condition, and this kind of condition, and Suzanne mentioned that it might not be happening in Hong Kong nowadays. I mean, if you go for so-called degradable auction, it may be a kind of greenwashing by the supplier, or somehow it's a kind of greenwashing your own company. Yeah, I'm shipping away from plastic. But anyway, time is running out of time. Anyway, hope we can answer all the questions for the audience, and thank you for all the honorable speaker. Yeah, you have bring a lot of insight to all those kind of procurement professionals. Yeah, maybe a lot of them in the past only focus on money, because the boss is always talking about saving money is the primary, somehow is still one of the major importance responsibility of procurement team. But nowadays we should go for more criteria like climate change and ocean pollution and the environment. Anyway, thank you for the audience. Thank you for your time of the speaker. Thank you. And I have to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you, because you take a lot of time and effort to prepare the PowerPoint for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
bye-bye.
very much.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.